Good evening, YouTube traveler. You've found a cozy little corner of the internet, and I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, I'd like to invite you on a gentle journey through time. You'll fall asleep to the story of one of the most beloved instruments in the world, the guitar. We'll trace its path from ancient stringed ancestors like the oud and the lute, through sunlit Spanish courtyards and smoky Delta blues bars, all the way to the electric hum of modern stages. And along the way, we'll meet the hands that shaped wood, stretched strings, and brought to life the sounds that have echoed across centuries. There's no rush here. The guitar's story unfolded over thousands of years, and tonight, we have all the time in the world to explore it. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Feel free to leave a comment, and if this kind of gentle, music-filled storytelling brings you comfort, consider subscribing so you never miss a journey. Now, close your eyes. Let's begin. Our journey begins not with the guitar itself, but with its earliest ancestors, instruments so ancient that their origins blur into the mist of prehistoric time. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans have been creating music by plucking strings stretched across resonating bodies for over 4,000 years. In the tombs of ancient Egypt, carved into stone tablets in Mesopotamia, and painted on pottery in early Persian settlements, we find images of musicians holding instruments that would look familiar to any guitarist today, even across such vast stretches of time. The oldest known guitar-like instrument was discovered in the tomb of an Egyptian singer named Harmos, dating back to around 1300 BC. This ancient instrument had a hollow body and a long neck, fundamental design elements that would persist through every subsequent evolution of stringed instruments. In Babylonia, clay plaques show people playing lute-like instruments with curved bodies and multiple strings. These weren't guitars as we understand them, but they represented the first human attempts to create sustained, melodic music through the vibration of tension strings. The ancient world gave birth to several distinct families of stringed instruments that would eventually contribute to the guitar's development. In Greece, musicians played the kithara, a sophisticated lyre with a wooden soundbox that could produce complex harmonies. The Greeks understood that the size and shape of the resonating chamber directly affected the instrument's tone and volume, principles that remain central to guitar construction today. Meanwhile, in Persia, the tanbur provided another crucial evolutionary branch, featuring a long neck with frets that allowed musicians to play specific pitches with precision. Perhaps most importantly for our story, the ancient Middle East developed the oud, an instrument whose influence on European music cannot be overstated. The oud featured a rounded back, a wide neck, and multiple courses of strings, typically made from animal gut. Unlike many other ancient instruments, the oud was designed specifically for plucking rather than bowing, establishing the fundamental technique that would define all guitars. The sound of the oud was intimate and expressive, capable of both rhythmic accompaniment and intricate melodic passages. When the Moors invaded southern Spain in 701 AD, they brought the oud with them, introducing its construction techniques and playing styles to European musicians. This cultural exchange would prove pivotal in the guitar's development, as Spanish instrument makers began experimenting with ways to combine the oud's musical capabilities with European woodworking traditions and aesthetic preferences. The fusion of these two musical worlds, the Arabic oud tradition and the European lute tradition, created the conditions necessary for the guitar's eventual emergence. The European lute had evolved from earlier Middle Eastern instruments and became extremely popular throughout medieval Europe. Unlike the oud, the lute featured a flat soundboard and a more standardized construction approach. It typically had 4 or 5 courses of strings and was often played with a quill feather, rather than the fingers alone. The lute's popularity spread from the Egyptians to the Greeks, then to the Romans, who introduced it throughout their expanding empire. By medieval times, the lute had become the predominant stringed instrument in European court music and scholarly musical study. The lute's construction was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Its curved back was built from multiple thin strips of wood, bent and joined with precise craftsmanship. The neck featured movable frets made from tied-on gut, allowing musicians to adjust the instrument's intonation as needed. This attention to tunability and precision reflected the lute's important role in formal musical education and performance, where accurate pitch relationships were essential for ensemble playing and complex compositional works. As these various stringed instrument traditions began to merge in medieval Spain, a new instrument began to take shape. The earliest recognizable guitars appeared in Spain around the turn of the 15th century, though they were initially called vihuelas. These instruments represented a crucial evolutionary step, combining the flat-backed construction of European lutes with the playing techniques and musical sensibilities derived from the Arabic oud tradition. The vihuela was shaped like a guitar, with a familiar figure-8 form that provided both structural strength and optimal acoustic properties. However, it was tuned like a lute, with 6 double courses of strings arranged in fourths and 1 major third, similar to modern guitar tuning, but with paired strings instead of single ones. This doubled string configuration provided greater volume and tonal richness than single strings could achieve with the technology available at the time. What made the vihuela particularly significant was its social status and the sophisticated musical repertoire that developed around it. Unlike the guitar, which was associated with common folk music, the vihuela was played by the aristocracy and attracted serious composers and skilled musicians. This elevated status led to the development of complex musical techniques and a substantial body of written music that has survived to this day, providing us with detailed insights into Renaissance playing techniques and musical aesthetics. The construction of vihuelas varied considerably during the Renaissance period, as there was no standardization or mass production. Overall, vihuelas looked very similar to modern guitars, though they were smaller and featured different proportional relationships between the body, neck, and head. The first generation of vihuelas, from the mid-15th century onward, had sharp cuts to the waist, similar to those found on violins. Around 1490, a second generation emerged with the now familiar, smooth-curved, figure-8-shaped body contours that we associate with modern guitars. This evolution in body shape was not merely aesthetic, but represented important advances in understanding how the physical structure of an instrument affects its sound production and resonance. The transition from sharp-waisted to smooth-curved bodies improved both the structural integrity of the instruments and their acoustic properties, allowing for better projection and tonal balance. These improvements were crucial as the vihuela's repertoire became increasingly complex and demanding. The vihuela tradition flourished throughout the 16th century, particularly in Spain, Portugal, and Italy. Master craftsmen developed increasingly sophisticated construction techniques, experimenting with different wood combinations, bracing patterns, and finishing methods. The instruments were chromatically fretted, using movable, wrapped-around gut frets, similar to those used on lutes. This system allowed for accurate intonation across the entire fretboard and enabled musicians to play in various keys without retuning the instrument. As the 16th century progressed, musical tastes began to change, and the complex, aristocratic vihuela tradition gradually gave way to simpler instruments that would eventually become known as Baroque guitars. This transition reflected broader cultural shifts in European society, as music began to move from exclusively aristocratic settings into more popular and accessible contexts. The Baroque guitar would prove to be a crucial bridge between the sophisticated but limited vihuela tradition and the more versatile and widely adopted instruments that would follow. During the Baroque period, roughly from 1600 to 1750, the guitar underwent significant changes that moved it closer to its modern form, while establishing it as a popular instrument throughout Europe. These Baroque guitars effectively replaced the lute as the preferred stringed instrument for most musicians, offering greater accessibility and versatility than their more complex predecessors. The Baroque guitar typically featured 5 courses of gut strings and movable frets, making it considerably easier to play than the lute or vihuela. The Baroque guitar represented a democratization of stringed instrument music. While the lute required extensive training and considerable finger strength, the Baroque guitar could be learned relatively quickly by amateur musicians. This accessibility contributed to its rapid spread throughout European society, from royal courts to middle-class homes to taverns and street performances. The instrument's portable size and robust construction made it ideal for travel and informal music making. One of the most significant developments during the Baroque period was the evolution of distinctive playing techniques, particularly the sophisticated strumming patterns known as rasguiado. This technique involved rapid, controlled strumming across all strings using various combinations of fingers, creating complex, rhythmic patterns that would later become fundamental to Spanish guitar playing and essential elements of flamenco technique. The development of rasguiado demonstrated how playing techniques could evolve alongside instrument construction, with each influencing the other in an ongoing cycle of innovation. The Baroque guitar also saw important changes in string configuration. Before 1600, most guitars featured 4 courses of strings, but a 5th course was added during the early Baroque period, expanding the instrument's range and harmonic possibilities. By the late 18th century, a 6th course had been added, bringing the total number of string courses to 6. This gradual expansion of the instrument's range reflected both technological improvements in string manufacturing and the increasing complexity of guitar music. The evolution toward 6 courses of strings was particularly significant because it provided the instrument with greater versatility while maintaining the paired string system that offered both volume and tonal richness. Each course consisted of 2 strings tuned to the same pitch, though sometimes the higher courses featured strings tuned an octave apart to create a fuller, more complex sound. This doubled string configuration was well suited to the limited volume capabilities of gut strings and the acoustic environments in which Baroque guitars were typically played. As the 18th century progressed, instrument makers and musicians began to experiment with replacing the traditional double courses with single strings. This transition was gradual and varied by region, with some areas maintaining double courses well into the 19th century, while others adopted single strings much earlier. The change to single strings represented both a technological advancement in string manufacturing and a shift in musical aesthetics toward clearer, more defined individual notes rather than the richer, more complex tones produced by double courses. By the 1790s, the evolution of Spanish guitars had largely settled into the standard format we recognize today. These instruments featured the familiar body shape and 6 courses of strings. Though they were generally smaller than modern guitars, the most significant change during this period was the replacement of double courses with single strings, tuned to what became the standard guitar tuning, E, A, D, G, B, E. This tuning system proved so effective that it has remained largely unchanged for over 200 years, providing a stable foundation for teaching methods, musical notation systems, and technical approaches that could be shared among musicians worldwide. The standardization of guitar tuning was particularly important because it allowed for the development of consistent fingering patterns and chord formations that could be learned and applied universally. Unlike instruments with variable tuning systems, the guitar's standardized approach meant that a piece of music or a technical exercise learned in one location could be applied anywhere else, facilitating the spread of guitar technique and repertoire across cultural and geographical boundaries. By the end of the 18th century, the guitar had achieved a level of standardization and refinement that made it suitable for both popular and art music contexts. The instrument's construction had become sophisticated enough to produce adequate volume and tonal variety for concert performance, yet remained simple enough for amateur musicians to build, maintain, and play. This balance between accessibility and capability would prove crucial to the guitar's continued evolution and growing popularity in the century that followed. The stage was now set for the revolutionary developments that would occur in the 19th century, when Spanish luthier Antonio de Torres Jurado would transform the guitar from a pleasant but limited folk instrument into the powerful, expressive concert instrument that would capture the imagination of serious composers and virtuoso performers worldwide. But that transformation, and the remarkable story of how one man's innovations created the foundation for all modern classical guitars, is where our next chapter begins. For now, let your mind rest with these images of Baroque musicians in candlelit rooms, their fingers dancing across gut strings, creating music that bridged the gap between the ancient world and our modern era. The guitar was growing, evolving, finding its voice through the hands of countless unknown craftspeople and musicians who each contributed something to its development. Tomorrow's guitars would be louder, more precise, and more powerful, but they would carry within their construction the accumulated wisdom of these earlier centuries, when music was made by hand in small workshops, and the sound of plucked strings provided comfort and joy in a world lit only by fire. The transformation that would define the modern guitar began with a man whose name might not be familiar to casual listeners, but whose innovations echo in every classical guitar made today. Antonio de Torres Jurado was born on June 13, 1817, in the small village of La Cañada de San Urbano in southern Spain. He was not a musician by training, but rather a carpenter who became fascinated with guitar construction through a chance encounter that would change the course of musical history. Torres had made some guitars during the 1840s as a side pursuit to his carpentry work, but it wasn't until the 1850s that he met the renowned guitarist and composer Julian Arcas. This meeting proved pivotal, as Arcas offered Torres detailed advice on guitar construction from a performer's perspective. Their collaboration transformed Torres from a casual instrument maker into what one historian called an inveterate investigator of guitar construction. The partnership between craftsman and musician created the perfect conditions for revolutionary innovation. What made Torres extraordinary was his scientific approach to understanding how guitar construction affected sound production, Unlike previous guitar makers who followed traditional methods passed down through generations, Torres questioned every aspect of design. He reasoned that the soundboard was the key to the instrument's voice, and to increase its volume and responsiveness, he made his guitars not only larger but fitted them with thinner, lighter soundboards that were arched in both directions. This innovation might have weakened the instrument structurally, but Torres solved this problem with his revolutionary fan bracing system. Earlier guitar makers had used various bracing patterns, but Torres developed a systematic approach using either 5 or 8 struts, arranged in a fan pattern beneath the soundboard. This design allowed the top to vibrate more freely while maintaining structural integrity, resulting in guitars with unprecedented volume and tonal complexity. The plantilla, or overall shape of the guitar body, was equally important to Torres. Most earlier guitars were quite slim with a wider waist than what Torres preferred, though he retained the traditional concept of placing the waist 2/5 of the way down the body length. While Torres did build some smaller instruments for intimate settings, his primary focus was on larger concert guitars designed to fill performance halls without amplification. Torres also standardized the scale length at 650 millimeters, a measurement that several other luthiers had used previously, but which Torres favored specifically for the concert guitars he built for professional musicians. When other instrument makers heard Torres' guitars played by these professionals, many began copying his proportions in an effort to enhance their own instrument's playability and projection. Today, the 650 millimeter scale length remains one of the industry standards for classical guitars. The guitars Torres created represented such a dramatic improvement over previous instruments that they immediately became the standard for serious players. His instruments were not particularly loud by modern standards, but they possessed a clear, balanced, firm, and rounded tone that projected remarkably well in concert settings. Professional guitarists who acquired Torres instruments found they could express musical ideas that had been impossible on earlier guitars, leading to an expansion of the classical guitar repertoire and playing techniques. Torres divided his career into 2 distinct periods. The first period belonged to Sevilla from 1852 to 1870, where he established his reputation and developed his fundamental construction principles. The second period occurred in Almeria from 1871 to 1893, where he refined his techniques and built instruments that would influence guitar makers worldwide. His guitars were so superior to those of his contemporaries that their example changed how guitars were built, first in Spain, then throughout Europe, and eventually across the globe. The cultural context in which Torres developed his innovations reveals how musical instrument evolution responds to broader social changes. In mid-19th century Andalusia, flamenco was emerging as a powerful new musical genre. Previously practiced primarily by Romani musicians in small communities, flamenco suddenly became popular with non-Romani audiences who flocked to cafes to hear this passionate, expressive music. Every cafe owner searched for new talent to attract customers, and each guitarist sought that certain edge that would give them their individual sound, especially something that would allow them to be heard above the noise and excitement of crowded venues. Torres responded to this market demand by creating instruments specifically designed for this new genre of musician. His guitars could produce both the delicate, nuanced sounds required for intimate flamenco passages and the powerful percussive effects needed for rhythmic accompaniment in noisy environments. Torres had little contact with what we might call the classical guitar world, which was virtually non-existent in mid-19th century Andalusia. His innovations were not theoretical but practical responses to the real-world demands of working musicians who needed instruments capable of exceptional dynamic range and projection. The techniques and construction methods he developed were specifically designed to meet the needs of flamenco performers, though they would later prove equally valuable for classical music. The influence of Torres extended far beyond his individual instruments to encompass a complete transformation in how guitars were understood as musical tools. Guitar makers throughout Europe began studying and copying his methods, leading to a gradual standardization of construction techniques that had previously varied dramatically from region to region. His basic design principles are still followed by classical guitar makers today, more than a century after his death. During this same period, developments in string technology were equally transformative. For the first several centuries of guitar development, strings had been made from what was called catgut, though this material actually came from animal intestines, primarily from sheep and cattle. The term catgut was simply shorthand for cattle gut, reflecting the common usage of referring to livestock as cattle, regardless of species. The process of creating gut strings was labor-intensive and required considerable skill. Craftsmen would clean the small intestines, remove all fat, and steep them in water. Then they would scrape off the external membrane with a blunt knife and steep the intestines again in potassium hydroxide. After smoothing and equalizing the prepared material, they would twist the gut strands together to create strings of various thicknesses, with string diameter determined by both the thickness of individual gut pieces and the number used in each string. Gut strings produced a warm, rich tone that many musicians still consider ideal for classical music, but they were problematic in numerous ways. Beyond their potentially off-putting origins, gut strings were tonally inconsistent, difficult to tune, extremely sensitive to changes in temperature and humidity, prone to breakage, and prohibitively expensive for most musicians. These limitations meant that guitar music remained largely confined to intimate settings where volume requirements were minimal. The introduction of steel strings in the mid-19th century represented a revolutionary change in guitar sound and playing technique. The exact origins of steel guitar strings have been lost to history, but they emerged in the United States sometime in the mid-1800s, coinciding with the period of Western expansion when extruded steel for fencing was readily available and inexpensive. According to some accounts, cowboys began stringing their guitars with the same wire they used to contain their cattle, creating the first steel string guitars out of practical necessity. Steel strings offered several significant advantages over gut strings. They were much louder, more durable, less affected by environmental conditions, and considerably less expensive to produce. The increased volume solved a major problem for musicians who wanted to play in larger venues or with other instruments. However, steel strings also created new challenges due to the dramatically increased tension they placed on guitar construction. Early steel strings were much thicker than modern versions because the technology for refining metal to extremely thin gauges had not yet been developed. The additional tension from these early steel strings would pull off guitar bridges and twist necks that had been designed for the much lower tension of gut strings. It wasn't until guitar makers began reinforcing necks with steel rods and ebony and developing stronger bracing systems that steel string guitars became as stable and reliable as they are today. The adoption of steel strings necessitated the development of distinctly different guitar construction approaches. Classical guitars continued to use gut strings, and later nylon, maintaining the traditional construction methods optimized for lower string tension. Meanwhile, steel string guitars required heavier bracing, reinforced necks, and more robust bridges, leading to instruments with different tonal characteristics and playing feels. This divergence created two distinct guitar families that persist today: Classical guitars, with their wider necks, lower string tension, and fingerstyle playing approach, remained focused on traditional repertoire and concert performance. Steel string guitars, with their narrower necks, higher tension, and accommodation for both fingerstyle and flat pick playing, became the foundation for folk, country, blues, and eventually rock music. The development of nylon strings during World War II represented another crucial innovation in guitar string technology. During the war, demand for surgical sutures, which were also made from catgut, made the source material difficult to obtain for musical applications. DuPont had invented nylon in 1935, but no one had considered using this new synthetic material for musical instruments until traditional gut became scarce. The breakthrough came through the collaboration between classical guitar maestro Andres Segovia and New York luthier Albert Augustine in 1948. During a concert tour of the United States, Segovia had difficulty finding his preferred catgut strings. He mentioned this problem at a party for foreign diplomats, where General Lindemann of the British Embassy obtained some experimental nylon strings from members of the DuPont family and presented them to the maestro. Segovia found that nylon strings were perfectly adequate for classical guitar performance, though they initially possessed a slightly metallic timbre that he hoped could be eliminated through further development. Working with Augustine, they refined the nylon string manufacturing process to create strings that could mimic traditional gut strings in sound and feel while being easier to produce, more consistent in quality, less affected by humidity, far more durable, and significantly less expensive. The development of nylon strings allowed classical guitar to maintain its traditional sound character while gaining the practical advantages of modern materials. Segovia's endorsement carried enormous weight in the classical guitar world, and within a few years of their introduction, most classical and flamenco guitarists had switched from gut to nylon strings. This change helped standardize classical guitar sound and made the instrument more accessible to students and amateur players who had previously been deterred by the expense and unreliability of gut strings. While these developments were transforming classical guitar construction and string technology in Europe, equally significant innovations were occurring in the United States, where guitar makers were responding to different musical needs and cultural contexts. American luthiers began developing steel string guitars specifically designed for the louder, more aggressive playing styles emerging in folk, country, and blues music. The most influential American guitar maker of the 19th century was Christian Frederick Martin, a German immigrant who established his workshop in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. In 1833, Martin had trained in the European tradition, but quickly recognized that American musicians needed instruments capable of greater volume and projection than traditional European guitars could provide. He began experimenting with different bracing patterns and construction techniques, specifically designed to optimize steel string performance. Martin's most important innovation was the development of X bracing, a pattern that placed two main braces in an X configuration beneath the soundboard. This design provided the structural support necessary for steel strings while allowing the soundboard to vibrate efficiently, creating guitars with exceptional volume and clarity. The X bracing pattern became the foundation for virtually all steel string acoustic guitar construction and remains the standard approach used by most manufacturers today. The Martin Company also pioneered many other aspects of American guitar construction, including the development of different body sizes optimized for various musical applications. Their dreadnought body style, introduced in the early 20th century, became particularly influential in country and folk music due to its powerful bass response and overall volume. The company's attention to consistent quality and innovative design helped establish the United States as a major center of guitar manufacturing and design. Orville Gibson, working in Kalamazoo, Michigan, developed another influential approach to guitar construction. Rather than following the traditional method of building guitars with flat tops and backs, Gibson experimented with carved tops and backs similar to those used in violin construction. His archtop guitars, introduced in the 1890s, featured carved spruce tops and maple backs that created a different tonal character, particularly well suited to the emerging jazz music of the early 20th century. Gibson's archtop guitars produced a focused, punchy tone that could cut through the sound of brass instruments and drums in jazz ensembles. The carved construction also created instruments with distinctive visual appeal, featuring elegant curves and sophisticated appointments that appealed to professional musicians seeking instruments that looked as impressive as they sounded. The Gibson Company, which was formed after Orville Gibson's death, continued developing and refining archtop guitars throughout the early 20th century. These parallel developments in Spain and the United States created the foundation for the diverse guitar family we know today. Spanish classical guitars, with their nylon strings and traditional construction, continued to serve classical and flamenco music. American steel string guitars, both flat-top and arch-top varieties, provided the volume and versatility needed for popular music genres that were emerging in the New World. As the 19th century drew to a close, the guitar had evolved from a pleasant but limited parlor instrument into a sophisticated musical tool capable of serving both intimate classical music and powerful popular music applications. The stage was set for the explosive growth in guitar popularity that would characterize the 20th century, when new technologies, musical styles, and cultural movements would transform the guitar from a relatively specialized instrument into the most popular musical instrument in the world. The foundations laid by Torres in Spain and Martin and Gibson in America provided the technical and aesthetic framework that would support this transformation. Their innovations in construction, materials, and design created instruments capable of meeting the demands of recording technology, amplification systems, and the diverse musical styles that would emerge in the century ahead. The guitar was ready to become the voice of popular music, though the men who created these foundational innovations could hardly have imagined how far their work would carry the instrument they had helped to perfect. The dawn of the 20th century brought with it a new energy that would forever change how music was made and shared. The guitar, having spent centuries evolving in small workshops and intimate performance spaces, was about to encounter forces that would transform it from a beloved but relatively quiet instrument into the dominant voice of popular music. Recording technology, mass production, and new musical styles emerging from America's cultural melting pot would push guitar makers and players toward innovations that earlier generations could never have imagined. In the early 1900s, the guitar occupied a curious position in American musical life. While European classical traditions continued to favor orchestral instruments and piano, American folk culture had embraced the guitar's portability and versatility. Rural musicians found that a single guitar could provide both melody and accompaniment, making it ideal for solo performers and small ensembles. The instrument's relatively low cost compared to pianos or brass instruments made it accessible to working-class musicians who formed the backbone of emerging American musical styles. The development of recording technology in the 1890s and early 1900s created new demands for musical instruments. Early recording equipment was primitive by modern standards, requiring musicians to play directly into large horns that mechanically transferred sound vibrations to wax cylinders or discs. This process favored instruments that could produce clear, penetrating tones, and the guitar's natural characteristics made it well suited to these early recording sessions. As recording technology improved throughout the 1910s and 1920s, guitar makers began to recognize that their instruments needed to be optimized, not just for live performance, but also for reproduction through the limited frequency response of early recording and playback equipment. This realization drove further innovations in construction techniques, with makers seeking to create guitars that would sound clear and balanced when captured by microphones and played back through speakers. The Martin Guitar Company, under the leadership of Frank Henry Martin, continued to refine their steel string designs throughout this period. They introduced new body sizes and proportions specifically designed to balance the various frequency ranges of the guitar, ensuring that bass, mid-range, and treble frequencies would be equally represented in both live performance and recorded music. Their size 0, 00, and 0 models became standards that influenced guitar construction throughout the industry. Meanwhile, the Gibson Company was developing their own approach to guitar design under the guidance of Lloyd Loar, a classically trained musician and acoustic engineer who joined the company in 1919. Loar brought a scientific approach to instrument design, using his understanding of acoustics and vibration to create guitars with unprecedented tonal complexity and projection. His most famous creation, the Gibson L5 archtop guitar, introduced in 1922, featured F-holes like a violin, a carved spruce top, and internal bracing specifically designed to enhance the instrument's acoustic properties. The L5 represented a breakthrough in guitar construction because it was designed specifically for ensemble playing. Earlier guitars had been primarily solo instruments or accompaniment tools, but the L5 could hold its own alongside horns, drums, and other loud instruments in the jazz bands that were becoming popular in urban areas. The guitar's carved top and F-hole design created a focused, punchy tone that could cut through complex musical arrangements without losing clarity or definition. This period also saw the emergence of distinctive American playing styles that would influence guitar technique for generations to come. In the rural South, musicians were developing what would later be called country blues, a style that combined African musical traditions with European harmonic structures and instruments. Players like Blind Lemon Jefferson and Mississippi John Hurt created intricate finger-picking patterns that used the guitar as both a rhythmic and melodic instrument, often incorporating bass lines, chords, and melodies simultaneously. The Carter family, a group from Virginia that began recording in 1927, popularized a guitar technique that would become fundamental to country music. Maybelle Carter developed what became known as the Carter scratch, a method of playing melody notes on the bass strings while strumming rhythm chords on the higher strings. This technique allowed a single guitarist to provide complete musical accompaniment for vocals, making it possible for small groups to create full, rich arrangements without additional instruments. In urban areas, particularly in cities like New York, Chicago, and Kansas City, jazz musicians were pushing guitar technique in different directions. Eddie Lang, often considered the first great jazz guitarist, developed sophisticated chord progressions and single-note improvisations that established the guitar as a legitimate solo instrument in jazz ensembles. His recordings with violinist Joe Venuti and other jazz stars demonstrated that the guitar could be both rhythmically supportive and melodically adventurous. The Great Depression of the 1930s had a profound impact on American music and guitar development. Economic hardship drove many rural musicians to seek work in cities, bringing their musical styles and techniques to urban audiences through radio broadcasts, recordings, and live performances. The guitar's portability and relatively low cost made it an ideal instrument for traveling musicians who needed to transport their equipment frequently and couldn't afford expensive instruments. During this period, the guitar began to take on symbolic significance beyond its purely musical function. It became associated with the common person, the wandering musician, and the authentic expression of American experience. This cultural positioning would prove crucial to the guitar's eventual dominance in popular music, as it established the instrument's identity as something accessible, honest, and emotionally direct. The technical demands of Depression-era music also drove further innovations in guitar construction. Musicians needed instruments that could withstand constant travel and frequent playing while maintaining their sound quality and structural integrity. Guitar makers responded by developing more robust construction techniques, better finishing methods, and improved hardware that could survive the rigors of professional use. Martin introduced their dreadnought body style during this period, a large-bodied design originally created for the Oliver Ditson Company, but later adopted as a Martin model. The dreadnought's increased internal air volume and larger soundboard area created guitars with exceptional volume and bass response, making them ideal for vocal accompaniment and ensemble playing. This body style would eventually become the most popular acoustic guitar configuration and remains a standard design today. Gibson continued to refine their archtop designs, introducing new models with different sizes and appointments to serve various musical markets. Their Super 400, introduced in 1934, represented the pinnacle of archtop guitar construction, featuring intricate inlays, premium materials, and construction techniques borrowed from violin making. These high-end instruments attracted professional musicians who needed guitars capable of both exceptional sound quality and visual appeal for stage performance. The 1930s also saw the first serious attempts to create electrically amplified guitars. The physics of acoustic guitar construction had reached certain practical limits by this time. Makers could create larger instruments for more volume, but beyond a certain point, larger guitars became unwieldy to play, and their proportions began to negatively affect tone quality. The solution lay not in making acoustic guitars louder, but in finding ways to amplify their sound electronically. Several inventors and musicians were working on this challenge simultaneously. George Beauchamp and Adolf Rickenbacker developed what is generally considered the first commercially successful electric guitar, the Rickenbacker A22 frying pan, introduced in 1931. This instrument featured a solid aluminum body and a magnetic pickup that converted string vibrations into electrical signals that could be amplified through speakers. The frying pan was revolutionary, not just for its electric capabilities, but for its solid body construction. By eliminating the acoustic resonance chamber, Beauchamp and Rickenbacker created an instrument that was immune to the feedback problems that plagued early attempts to amplify acoustic guitars. The solid body also allowed for sustain characteristics that were impossible to achieve with acoustic instruments, opening up new possibilities for musical expression. However, the frying pan was designed primarily for Hawaiian lap steel playing rather than conventional guitar technique. It would take several more years for inventors to develop electric guitars that could be played in the traditional manner while offering the volume and sustain advantages of electric amplification. During the late 1930s and early 1940s, several musicians and inventors were working independently on solutions to this challenge. Les Paul, a jazz guitarist and inventor from Wisconsin, began experimenting with solid-body electric guitars in his home workshop. Paul's approach was methodical and scientific. He built what he called the log, a solid piece of pine with a guitar neck attached and pickups mounted directly to the wood. To make the instrument look more conventional, he attached the cut-up pieces of an acoustic guitar body to the sides of his creation. Paul's experiments demonstrated that solid body construction could produce sustained notes and clear amplified tone without the feedback problems associated with amplified acoustic guitars. However, his design was too unconventional in appearance to attract commercial interest from guitar manufacturers, who were concerned that musicians wouldn't accept such a radical departure from traditional guitar appearance. Meanwhile, in Fullerton, California, Leo Fender was approaching the electric guitar challenge from a different perspective. Fender was not a musician, but rather a radio repair technician, an electronics enthusiast, who understood both the technical requirements of amplification and the practical needs of working musicians. His background in electronics gave him insights into pickup design and amplifier construction that purely musical inventors often lacked. Fender's first successful electric guitar, initially called the Broadcaster and later renamed the Telecaster, represented a breakthrough in electric guitar design. Introduced in 1950, the Telecaster featured a solid ash or alder body, a bolt-on maple neck, and two single-coil pickups that provided both rhythm and lead tones. The instrument's construction was deliberately simple and modular, making it relatively inexpensive to manufacture and easy to repair or modify. What made the Telecaster revolutionary was not just its sound, but its approach to manufacturing. Fender designed the instrument using techniques borrowed from furniture making and automotive production, with interchangeable parts and assembly line construction methods. This approach allowed Fender to produce high-quality electric guitars at prices that working musicians could afford, democratizing access to electric instruments in much the same way that Martin and Gibson had made acoustic guitars more accessible in earlier decades. The Telecaster's sound was bright, cutting, and distinctly different from acoustic guitars or the few electric guitars that had preceded it. The solid body construction eliminated acoustic resonance, creating a tone that was entirely dependent on the strings, pickups, and amplification system. This created new possibilities for musical expression, as players could use volume, distortion, and electronic effects to shape their sound in ways that were impossible with acoustic instruments. The success of the Telecaster encouraged other manufacturers to develop their own electric guitar designs. Gibson, which had initially been skeptical of solid-body electrics, partnered with Les Paul to create the Gibson Les Paul model, introduced in 1952. The Les Paul featured a solid mahogany body with a carved maple top, a glued-in mahogany neck, and two humbucker pickups that provided a warmer, fuller tone than the Telecaster's single-coil pickups. The Les Paul represented a different philosophy of electric guitar design. Where the Telecaster was deliberately simple and functional, the Les Paul incorporated traditional guitar-making techniques and premium materials to create an instrument that looked and felt more like a conventional guitar while offering the advantages of electric amplification. The contrast between these two approaches established a fundamental division in electric guitar design that persists today. Fender continued to innovate throughout the 1950s, introducing the Stratocaster in 1954. The Stratocaster featured three single-coil pickups, a contoured body for playing comfort, and a vibrato system that allowed players to bend pitch by manipulating a spring-loaded bridge. The instrument's sleek, modern appearance and versatile sound capabilities made it immediately popular with musicians exploring the emerging rock and roll style. The development of electric guitars coincided with broader changes in American popular music. The 1950s saw the emergence of rock and roll, a style that combined elements of country, blues, gospel, and pop music into something entirely new. Electric guitars were perfectly suited to this new music, providing the volume, sustain, and tonal variety that rock and roll required. Musicians like Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, and Buddy Holly demonstrated the electric guitar's potential as both a rhythm and lead instrument in rock and roll. Berry's guitar solos combined country and blues techniques with the sustain and volume of electric amplification, creating a sound that was both familiar and revolutionary. His duckwalk stage movements and showmanship helped establish the electric guitar as a visual as well as musical focal point in popular music performance. The electric guitar's role in rock and roll was not merely technical, but cultural. The instrument became associated with youth rebellion, individual expression, and the breaking down of social barriers. Unlike acoustic guitars, which were often associated with folk traditions and rural culture, electric guitars represented modernity, technology, and the urban experience of post-war America. This cultural significance was enhanced by the electric guitar's visual impact on stage. The instruments were often brightly colored, featuring bold designs and modern materials like plastics and metals. When combined with amplification systems that could fill large venues, electric guitars transformed popular music from something intimate and acoustic into something powerful and theatrical. The success of electric guitars in rock and roll encouraged further innovation in both instrument design and amplification technology. Guitar makers began experimenting with different pickup configurations, body shapes, and electronic circuits to create instruments with distinctive tonal characteristics. Amplifier manufacturers developed new circuits and speaker configurations to better reproduce the electric guitar's extended frequency range and dynamic capabilities. By the end of the 1950s, the electric guitar had established itself as the dominant instrument in popular music. The acoustic guitar continued to serve important roles in folk, country, and classical music, but electric guitars had become the defining sound of the emerging youth culture and commercial music industry. The stage was set for the explosive growth in guitar popularity that would characterize the 1960s and beyond. The transformation from acoustic to electric represented more than just a technological change. It was a fundamental shift in how music was conceived, performed, and experienced. Electric guitars could sustain notes indefinitely, be processed through electronic effects, and produce volumes that could compete with brass sections and drum kits. These capabilities opened up musical possibilities that had never existed before, encouraging composers and performers to explore new territories of sound and expression. As the 1950s drew to a close, guitar manufacturers were producing a diverse range of instruments designed to serve different musical styles and economic markets. From Martin's traditional acoustic guitars to Fender's innovative electrics, from Gibson's carved archtops to the solid-body Les Paul, the guitar family had expanded to include instruments capable of serving virtually any musical application. The guitar was no longer just an accompaniment instrument or a folk tradition. It had become the voice of modern popular music, capable of both intimate expression and powerful projection. The innovations of the early 20th century had transformed a centuries-old acoustic instrument into something entirely new, while still maintaining the essential characteristics that had made the guitar appealing to musicians and listeners throughout its long history. This foundation of acoustic and electric instruments, construction techniques, and playing styles would support the remarkable expansion of guitar music that would occur in the decades ahead. The 1960s would see the guitar become truly global, influencing musical styles worldwide and establishing itself as perhaps the most versatile and expressive instrument ever created. But that story, with its tales of British invasions, psychedelic experimentation, and the guitar's role in cultural revolution, represents the next chapter in our ongoing journey through the instrument's remarkable history. For now, rest easy, knowing that by the late 1950s, the guitar had completed its transformation from ancient stringed instrument to modern musical icon. The solid foundations laid by centuries of craftsmen and innovators had created an instrument family capable of infinite variety and expression, ready to serve the musical adventures that lay ahead in the revolutionary decades to come. The 1960s arrived like a cultural earthquake, and the guitar found itself at the epicenter of a musical revolution that would reshape not just popular music, but the very fabric of society itself. The decade began with the guitar already established as the voice of rock and roll, but what happened next would transform it into something far more significant, a symbol of generational change, artistic freedom, and global cultural exchange. The early 1960s saw the emergence of what would become known as the British invasion, a phenomenon that began when 4 young men from Liverpool stepped off a plane at Kennedy Airport in February 1964. The Beatles had grown up listening to American rock and roll, blues, and country music, but they filtered these influences through their own cultural perspective and musical sensibilities. Their approach to the guitar was both reverent and revolutionary, honoring the traditions established by Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly, while pushing the instrument into new territories of harmony, melody, and sonic experimentation. John Lennon and George Harrison's guitar work with the Beatles demonstrated how electric guitars could serve multiple roles within a single song. They could provide rhythmic foundation, melodic counterpoint, and textural coloration, often switching between these functions seamlessly. Harrison's use of the Rickenbacker 12-string guitar on songs like A Hard Day's Night created a shimmering orchestral quality that expanded the sonic palette available to rock musicians. The 12 strings doubled courses produced a natural chorus effect that filled out the frequency spectrum, allowing a 4-piece band to create remarkably full arrangements. The Rickenbacker Company, founded by Adolf Rickenbacker in the 1930s, had been primarily known for their lap steel guitars and early electric instruments. Their 6- and 12-string electric guitars featured distinctive hollow and semi-hollow body construction with F-holes, creating instruments that combined the sustain and volume of solid body electrics with some of the acoustic resonance of traditional guitars. The bright, jangly tone of Rickenbacker guitars became synonymous with the emerging folk rock and psychedelic movements. As the Beatles' popularity exploded worldwide, guitar manufacturers found themselves struggling to meet demand for the specific instruments these influential musicians played. The Epiphone Casino, a hollow-body electric guitar that John Lennon particularly favored, saw a dramatic surge in sales. Gibson's response was to acquire the Epiphone brand in 1957, allowing them to produce both high-end Gibson models and more affordable Epiphone versions of similar designs. The mid-1960s also saw the rise of guitar-driven bands from other parts of Britain. The Rolling Stones, with Keith Richards wielding his Telecaster and later his Gibson Les Paul, brought a grittier, blues-influenced approach to rock guitar. Richards developed a distinctive playing style that emphasized rhythm and groove over technical virtuosity, using open tunings and capo techniques borrowed from folk and blues traditions. His approach demonstrated that effective guitar playing was not necessarily about speed or complexity, but about finding the right sound for each musical context. The Kinks, led by Dave Davies, pioneered the use of distortion and feedback as musical elements, rather than technical problems to be avoided. Davies achieved his distorted sound by slashing the speakers in his amplifiers with razor blades, creating a fuzzy, saturated tone that would later influence the entire heavy metal genre. This willingness to experiment with and even deliberately damage equipment reflected a broader cultural shift toward challenging established norms and exploring new possibilities. Meanwhile, in the United States, folk music was experiencing its own revival, driven partly by the social and political upheavals of the decade. Bob Dylan's controversial decision to go electric at the 1965 Newport Folk Festival symbolized the merger of traditional acoustic folk music with electric rock instrumentation. Dylan's use of electric guitars was not merely about volume or modernity. It was about expanding the expressive range available to folk musicians and connecting with younger audiences who had grown up with rock and roll. The folk rock movement that emerged from this fusion created new demands for guitar construction and design. Musicians needed instruments that could serve both intimate acoustic settings and full band electric arrangements. This led to the development of acoustic electric guitars, instruments that combine traditional acoustic construction with built-in pickup systems that allowed them to be amplified without losing their natural acoustic character. The Guild Guitar Company, founded in 1952 by Alfred Drong, became particularly influential in the folk and acoustic music scene. Guild guitars were known for their exceptional build quality and rich, warm tone that made them favorites among professional folk musicians. Their F-Series guitars, with their larger bodies and powerful projection, became standards for vocal accompaniment and ensemble playing. In California, the emerging psychedelic music scene was pushing electric guitar technology in entirely new directions. Musicians like Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead and Robbie Krieger of The Doors were exploring the sonic possibilities created by combining electric guitars with electronic effects pedals, creating soundscapes that had never been heard before. The development of effects pedals like the fuzzbox, wah-wah, and reverb units opened up new territories of musical expression. The Gibson SG, introduced in 1961 as a redesigned Les Paul model, became particularly popular with psychedelic and hard rock musicians. Its lightweight construction, fast neck, and aggressive appearance made it ideal for the more energetic and experimental music of the late 1960s. The SG's double cutaway design provided easy access to the highest frets, encouraging lead guitarists to explore the upper registers of the instrument in ways that had been difficult on earlier designs. Fender continued to innovate throughout the decade, introducing new models and refining existing designs. The Fender Jazzmaster, originally designed for jazz musicians, found unexpected popularity with surf rock and alternative musicians who appreciated its unique vibrato system and distinctive tone. The Jaguar, with its shorter scale length and complex switching system, appealed to musicians who wanted an instrument with a different feel and sound than the standard Stratocaster or Telecaster. The late 1960s witnessed the emergence of guitar virtuosos who pushed the technical boundaries of electric guitar, playing to unprecedented levels. Jimi Hendrix, perhaps more than any other single musician, demonstrated the full expressive potential of the electric guitar. His approach combined blues tradition with psychedelic innovation, using feedback, distortion, and electronic effects as integral parts of his musical vocabulary, rather than merely decorative elements. Hendrix's technique was revolutionary in its physicality and emotional directness. He played with his teeth, behind his back, and even set his guitars on fire during performances. But these theatrical elements never overshadowed his musical innovation. His use of the Fender Stratocaster showcased the instrument's versatility, from delicate clean tones to screaming feedback-laden passages. The Stratocaster's 3-pickup configuration and 5-way selector switch allowed Hendrix to access a wide range of tones within a single song, contributing to his reputation as a sonic alchemist. Eric Clapton's work with Cream demonstrated another approach to electric guitar virtuosity, one that emphasized blues tradition while incorporating elements of jazz harmony and improvisation. Clapton's use of the Gibson Les Paul through Marshall amplifiers created a warm, singing tone that influenced countless rock guitarists. His approach to soloing emphasized melody and emotional content over pure technical display, showing that virtuosity could be both impressive and musically meaningful. The development of more powerful amplification systems during this period was crucial to the electric guitar's evolution. Jim Marshall, a British music store owner and amplifier repair technician, began building guitar amplifiers in the early 1960s that would become legendary for their distinctive sound. Marshall amplifiers, with their characteristic warm overdrive and powerful projection, became the preferred choice for many rock guitarists and helped define the sound of British rock music. The Marshall stack, consisting of a separate amplifier head connected to multiple speaker cabinets, became an iconic image of rock music. These systems could produce volumes that were previously impossible, allowing guitarists to fill large venues and compete with increasingly powerful drum kits and PA systems. The visual impact of towering amplifier stacks also contributed to the theatrical aspect of rock performance, creating an imposing presence that matched the music's emotional intensity. As the 1960s progressed, guitar manufacturers began to recognize that different musical styles require different instrumental approaches. The jazz community continued to favor archtop guitars, with instruments like the Gibson L5 and Super 400 remaining standards for traditional jazz performance. However, the emergence of jazz fusion in the late 1960s brought electric solid-body guitars into jazz contexts, with musicians like Larry Coryell and John McLaughlin demonstrating that rock guitar techniques could be applied to jazz harmony and rhythm. The country music community also maintained its own distinct guitar traditions while incorporating elements from rock and pop music. The Fender Telecaster remained the preferred instrument for country lead guitar, with its bright cutting tone ideally suited to the pedal steel influence style that characterized country music. However, country musicians also began experimenting with other electric guitars and effects, gradually expanding the sonic palette of the genre. During the same period, classical guitar was experiencing its own renaissance, largely due to the influence of Andres Segovia and his students. Segovia had spent decades elevating the classical guitar from a folk instrument to a concert hall instrument, commissioning works from major composers and developing performance techniques that maximize the instrument's expressive potential. His efforts inspired a new generation of classical guitarists who continued to expand the instrument's repertoire and technical possibilities. The construction of classical guitars also continued to evolve during the 1960s. Luthiers like José Ramírez in Spain and Hermann Hauser in Germany were refining the Torres design, experimenting with different wood combinations, bracing patterns, and construction techniques to create instruments with improved projection and tonal balance. These innovations were driven partly by the needs of concert performance, as classical guitarists increasingly performed in larger venues where volume and projection were crucial. The emergence of bossa nova from Brazil in the late 1950s and early 1960s introduced the world to another distinctive guitar tradition. Brazilian guitarists like João Gilberto and Baden Powell developed a sophisticated fingerstyle approach that combined jazz harmony with Brazilian rhythmic sensibilities. The nylon string classical guitar proved ideal for bossa nova, providing the warm, intimate tone that characterized the style while offering the harmonic complexity needed for jazz-influenced compositions. Brazilian guitar construction also contributed to the instrument's global development. Brazilian rosewood, harvested from the Amazon rainforest, became prized for guitar backs and sides due to its exceptional acoustic properties and beautiful appearance. However, concerns about environmental impact and sustainability would later restrict the use of Brazilian rosewood, leading guitar makers to explore alternative wood species and construction techniques. The folk music revival of the 1960s created renewed interest in traditional acoustic guitar construction and playing techniques. Musicians like Doc Watson, Mississippi John Hurt, and Reverend Gary Davis were rediscovered by young audiences who were hungry for authentic musical expression. These older musicians brought with them playing techniques and repertoires that had been developed over decades of performance, providing a direct connection to earlier guitar traditions. The fingerpicking styles developed by these traditional musicians influenced a new generation of acoustic guitarists who combined traditional techniques with contemporary songwriting and performance approaches. Musicians like Paul Simon, James Taylor, and Joni Mitchell developed sophisticated fingerstyle techniques that allowed a single acoustic guitar to provide complete musical arrangements, demonstrating that acoustic instruments could be just as expressive and complex as their electric counterparts. The 1960s also saw the beginning of serious academic study of guitar history and technique. Scholars and musicians began researching the instrument's development, collecting historical instruments, and documenting traditional playing techniques. This scholarly approach helped preserve guitar traditions that might otherwise have been lost, and provided a foundation for understanding the instrument's cultural and musical significance. Guitar instruction methods also became more sophisticated during this period. The development of new teaching techniques, combined with the availability of high-quality recordings, made it easier for aspiring guitarists to learn proper technique and musical concepts. The establishment of guitar programs at colleges and universities provided formal training opportunities that had previously been unavailable, helping to elevate the guitar's status as a serious musical instrument. The cultural impact of the guitar during the 1960s extended far beyond music. The instrument became associated with social movements, political protest, and generational identity. The image of a young person with a guitar became symbolic of rebellion against established authority and the search for authentic self-expression. This cultural positioning helped cement the guitar's role as more than just a musical instrument. It became a tool for communication, protest, and personal identity. The manufacturing industry responded to this cultural shift by producing guitars in unprecedented quantities and varieties. Companies like Yamaha from Japan began entering the guitar market, bringing new manufacturing techniques and quality control standards that challenged established American and European makers. This international competition drove innovation and helped make quality guitars more affordable and accessible to a broader range of musicians. The development of mass production techniques also made possible the creation of student-grade instruments that, while not comparable to professional guitars, were adequate for learning and casual playing. This democratization of guitar access was crucial to the instrument's growing popularity, as it allowed people from all economic backgrounds to participate in guitar culture. By the end of the 1960s, the guitar had been thoroughly established as the dominant instrument in popular music. The decade had seen the development of new playing techniques, construction methods, and cultural meanings that would influence all subsequent guitar development. The foundation had been laid for the explosive growth in guitar diversity and sophistication that would characterize the following decades. The innovations of the 1960s also established patterns of guitar development that continue today. The relationship between musical styles and instrument design, the importance of technological innovation, and the role of individual musicians in driving instrument evolution all became established during this crucial decade. The guitar had proven its adaptability and expressive range, setting the stage for even more dramatic developments in the years to come. As the psychedelic era gave way to the harder rock sounds of the early 1970s, the guitar was ready to meet new challenges and opportunities. The instrument had been transformed from a simple accompaniment tool into a complex, versatile, and culturally significant artifact that could serve virtually any musical or expressive purpose. The stage was set for the next chapter in the guitar's remarkable journey through human culture and musical expression. The 1970s opened with the guitar positioned as the undisputed king of popular music, but the decade would test and expand that dominance in ways that no one could have predicted. The counterculture movement of the late 1960s had established the guitar as a symbol of rebellion and artistic freedom. But the 1970s would see the instrument mature into something more complex and diverse, serving an increasingly wide range of musical styles and cultural contexts. The early 1970s witnessed the emergence of hard rock and heavy metal as distinct musical genres, and these styles placed unprecedented demands on both guitars and amplification systems. Bands like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and Deep Purple required instruments capable of producing massive volume levels while maintaining clarity and definition across complex harmonic structures. Jimmy Page's use of the Gibson Les Paul through Marshall amplification became a template for heavy rock guitar sound, demonstrating how the sustain and warmth of mahogany construction could be combined with high-gain amplification to create entirely new sonic textures. The Gibson Les Paul experienced a remarkable renaissance during this period. The model had been discontinued in 1960 in favor of the SG design, but growing demand from rock musicians led to its reintroduction in 1968. The Les Paul's thick, sustaining tone proved ideal for the heavier music of the early 1970s, and players like Page, Peter Frampton, and Mick Taylor helped establish it as the definitive rock guitar. The instrument's carved maple top and mahogany body created a tonal complexity that could cut through dense musical arrangements while providing the harmonic richness that rock music demanded. Meanwhile, Fender guitars continued to serve different musical functions within the rock spectrum. The Stratocaster's brighter, more cutting tone made it popular with musicians who needed to slice through heavy rhythm sections, while the Telecaster's simplicity and reliability made it a favorite for both country rock and punk musicians. The emergence of southern rock bands like the Allman Brothers and Lynyrd Skynyrd showcased yet another approach to electric guitar, combining blues tradition with rock power and featuring multiple lead guitarists playing interwoven parts. The 1970s also saw significant innovations in guitar electronics and effects processing. The development of more sophisticated distortion pedals, phase shifters, flangers, and delay units allowed guitarists to create sounds that had never been possible before. These effects were not merely decorative, but became integral parts of musical composition and arrangement. Musicians like David Gilmour of Pink Floyd demonstrated how electronic effects could be used to create atmospheric textures and emotional landscapes that expanded the guitar's expressive range far beyond traditional concepts of the instrument. The emergence of progressive rock in the early 1970s challenged guitarists to develop new levels of technical proficiency and musical sophistication. Bands like Yes, Genesis, and King Crimson incorporated complex time signatures, extended compositions, and influences from classical and jazz music into rock contexts. Guitarists like Steve Howe and Robert Fripp developed playing techniques that combined rock power with classical precision, often using multiple guitars and complex effects setups to create orchestral textures from electric instruments. This period also witnessed the rise of the first true guitar heroes, musicians whose technical abilities and musical innovations elevated them to celebrity status. Eric Clapton's work with Derek and the Dominoes, particularly on the album Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs, demonstrated how blues tradition could be combined with rock sophistication to create emotionally powerful music. His use of the Fender Stratocaster during this period helped establish that instrument as equally capable of blues expression as the Gibson models that had previously dominated the genre. Jeff Beck's experimental approach to electric guitar pushed the instrument into entirely new territories of sound and technique. His use of the Fender Stratocaster's vibrato system, combined with innovative amplifier and effect settings, created sounds that seemed to come from another world. Beck's willingness to experiment with feedback, electronic manipulation, and unconventional playing techniques showed that the electric guitar could be more than a traditional musical instrument. It could be a tool for sonic exploration and artistic expression. The manufacturing industry responded to these developments by creating increasingly specialized instruments designed for specific musical applications. Gibson introduced the Flying V and Explorer models, radical designs that had originally been created in the late 1950s, but found their audience among hard rock and heavy metal musicians of the 1970s. These instruments' unusual shapes were not merely aesthetic choices, but reflected different approaches to balance, resonance, and player ergonomics. The acoustic guitar also experienced significant development during the 1970s, driven partly by the singer-songwriter movement and the continued popularity of folk music. Martin Guitar Company introduced new models with different body sizes and bracing patterns, designed to optimize volume and projection for solo performance. Their D28 model became particularly popular among professional musicians, offering the volume and bass response needed for stage performance, while maintaining the tonal balance required for recording. Taylor Guitars, founded in 1974 by Bob Taylor and Kurt Listug, brought new approaches to acoustic guitar construction that would eventually revolutionize the industry. Taylor's use of computer-controlled machinery and innovative bracing designs created guitars with unprecedented consistency and projection. Their bolt-on neck system, borrowed from electric guitar construction, made repairs and adjustments much easier while maintaining excellent tone transfer between neck and body. The 1970s also saw the beginning of serious boutique guitar building, with individual luthiers creating custom instruments for professional musicians. Builders like John D'Angelico and James D'Acquisto continued the tradition of hand-carved archtop guitars, creating instruments that were both musical tools and works of art. These custom builders often incorporated innovations that would later be adopted by larger manufacturers, serving as research and development laboratories for the entire industry. The emergence of fusion jazz in the mid-1970s brought electric guitars into jazz contexts in unprecedented ways. Musicians like John McLaughlin, Larry Coryell, and Al Di Meola demonstrated that rock guitar techniques could be applied to jazz harmony and rhythm, creating a new hybrid genre that demanded instruments capable of both jazz sophistication and rock power. The Gibson ES-175 and other semi-hollow electric guitars became popular in fusion contexts, offering the sustain of solid-body instruments while retaining some acoustic resonance for jazz tonal characteristics. Japanese guitar manufacturers began making significant inroads into the global market during the 1970s, challenging the dominance of American companies. Yamaha, Ibanez, and other Japanese brands brought new manufacturing techniques and quality control standards that often exceeded those of established manufacturers. These companies also began creating innovative designs that combined elements from different guitar traditions, such as the Ibanez Artist Series, which featured Gibson-style construction with Fender-style electronics. The punk rock movement that emerged in the mid-1970s created an entirely different set of demands for guitar construction and performance. Punk musicians valued simplicity, reliability, and aggressive sound over technical sophistication or tonal complexity. The Fender Telecaster and various budget-level guitars became popular in punk contexts, demonstrating that musical expression was not dependent on expensive or sophisticated equipment. The cultural impact of punk rock extended beyond music to influence guitar manufacturing and marketing. Companies began producing budget-level instruments specifically designed for beginning musicians and punk rockers who valued attitude over technical perfection. This democratization of guitar access helped expand the instrument's reach into new communities and musical contexts. The 1970s also witnessed significant developments in amplifier technology that directly affected guitar design and performance. The introduction of master volume controls allowed guitarists to achieve overdriven tones at lower volume levels, making it possible to get cranked amp sounds in smaller venues and recording situations. This innovation changed how guitarists approached tone and technique, as they could now access sustain and distortion characteristics that had previously required dangerously loud volume levels. The development of more sophisticated speaker systems also influenced guitar tone and technique. The introduction of different speaker sizes and configurations allowed guitarists to tailor their sound more precisely to specific musical contexts. The combination of different amplifier heads with various speaker cabinets became a crucial part of professional guitar setup, with musicians often using multiple amplifier systems to achieve their desired sound. Recording technology continued to evolve throughout the 1970s, with multi-track recording becoming standard in professional studios. This technological development allowed guitarists to layer multiple parts and experiment with different sounds and textures within a single song. The ability to record rhythm and lead parts separately, or to combine acoustic and electric guitars in complex arrangements, expanded the compositional possibilities available to guitar-based music. The emergence of arena rock in the mid-1970s created new challenges for guitar amplification and performance. Bands like Kiss, Queen, and Boston needed guitar systems capable of filling venues with tens of thousands of seats, while maintaining clarity and definition. This demand drove the development of more powerful amplifier systems and innovative speaker configurations that could project guitar sound across vast distances without losing tonal quality. The disco movement of the late 1970s initially seemed to threaten the guitar's dominance in popular music, as synthesizers and drum machines became more prominent in dance music. However, guitarists adapted to this challenge by developing new techniques and sounds that could compete with electronic instruments. The use of wah-wah pedals, funky rhythm techniques, and percussive playing styles allowed guitars to remain relevant in disco and funk contexts. By the end of the 1970s, the guitar had demonstrated remarkable adaptability to changing musical styles and cultural contexts. The decade had seen the instrument serve everything from intimate singer-songwriter music to massive arena rock spectacles, from sophisticated jazz fusion to aggressive punk rock. This versatility established the guitar as more than just a musical instrument. It had become a universal tool for musical expression that could adapt to virtually any style or context. The innovations of the 1970s also laid the groundwork for even more dramatic developments in the following decades. The combination of improved manufacturing techniques, electronic innovations, and expanding musical styles created conditions that would support the explosive growth in guitar diversity and sophistication that would characterize the 1980s and beyond. The guitar had proven its staying power and adaptability, surviving challenges from electronic instruments and changing musical fashions to emerge stronger and more diverse than ever. The foundation had been established for the guitar's continued evolution as both a musical instrument and a cultural artifact, ready to serve whatever musical and expressive needs the future might bring. And now, dear listener, our long and winding journey through the story of the guitar comes gently to rest. From ancient tombs in Egypt to candlelit workshops in Spain, from the quiet pluck of gut strings to the thunder of electric chords in stadiums, the guitar has always carried with it the voice of the people, adaptable, expressive, and endlessly evolving. It is more than wood and wire. It is a bridge between cultures, between centuries, and between hearts, a quiet companion in sorrow, a fierce presence in rebellion, and a tender echo in love. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, may the echoes of all those strings, oud, vihuela, Stratocaster, classical, blend into one soft vibration, carrying you through dreams the way the guitar has carried so many through life. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed this peaceful journey, I'd be honored if you left a comment or subscribed. There are many more stories waiting to be told, but for now, rest well. You've earned it. Good night.